Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Delighted to be here and so happy to see particularly so many young people who are interested in the issues of life. You know, it's something that's been important to me ever since I was a youngster. I loved the whole concept of medicine and doctors because they prolonged and improved the quality of life. And I used to love to hear the stories about missionary doctors and how at great personal sacrifice they traveled all over the world to bring not only physical but mental and spiritual healing to people. And I determined when I was 8 years old that I would be a missionary doctor. And that was my goal until I was 13. At which time, having grown up in dire poverty, I decided I'd rather be rich. So at that point, missionary doctor was out and psychiatrist was in. I didn't know any psychiatrists, but on TV they seemed like rich people. You know, they lived in mansions and they drove Jaguars and they had these big plush offices. And all they had to do was talk to crazy people all day. And it seemed like I was doing that anyway. So I said, this is going to work out extremely well. And I started reading Psychology Today. I was the local shrink in high school. Everybody brought me their problems. I would sit them down, stroke my chin, say, tell me about your mama. And I majored in psychology in college at Yale. Had some incredible professors. One of them was Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud. And I was into all of this psychoanalysis. I was going to be the world's greatest psychiatrist. But when I got to medical school, I started meeting a bunch of psychiatrists. Need I say more? Just kidding, some of my best friends are psychiatrists. But I started listening to the neurosurgeons and the stuff that they were saying. And I was just so fascinated by the things that it could do with the brain and with the spinal cord. And I started moving in that direction, and people were saying, no, 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 that's the wrong field for you. At that time, there had been 8 black neurosurgeons in the world. But I'll tell you a secret. God does not dispense talent based on race. And I took the neurosurgery like a duck takes the water. I started out as an adult neurosurgeon, but I migrated toward the kids because with a kid, you can operate for 10, 12, 15, 20 hours. And if you're successful, the reward may be 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years of life. Whereas with an old geezer, you spend all that time operating, and they die in 5 years or something else. So I'd like to get a big return on my investment. I'm just kidding. I like old people. I'm one of them now. But let's talk about rights and who has rights. You know, so many people in the early days came to this country because they came from countries where people did not have rights, where they believed in the right of kings. Off with his head, no questions asked. It's very different. The founders of this country were amazing people, incredibly smart. They studied every governmental system that had ever existed in the world. And they were eclectics. They extracted the good things and moved out the bad things. And they worked hard to give us a constitution that respected the rights of people. And Ben Franklin was an incredible individual. He was the elder statesman during the last Constitutional Convention, when everything was about to fall apart and everybody was going to take their marbles and go home. And he got off in front of that assembly and he said, "Gentlemen, stop." He said, "Let's get down on our knees and let's seek wisdom from God." And they knelt down and prayed, and they got up and put together the Constitution of the United States, which I believe is a God-inspired document to look after the rights of all of us. But you look at the Declaration of Independence, what does it say? Life, first of all, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Think about that. And it says our rights come from God, not from government. So there are those who say, but some people or entities, as they like to call it, don't have any rights. There are those who would have thought that there was a time when people like me didn't have any rights in this country. Obviously, things have changed since that time. But we have to think about who has rights. You know, when I was a kid in the 5th grade, there were a lot of people who would have said, "This guy is nothing. He's not going to amount to anything." I was a horrible student. I was probably the worst student you've ever seen. Everybody teased me, called me dummy. I really hated it, but I tried to act like I didn't really care, but I did. But I did have a way to get back at my classmates. I was very good at one thing in particular. That was getting other people kicked out of class. I would study my classmates and figure out what made them really, really angry. And then I would just irritate them until they were about to explode. But I would never push the last button to make them explode until we were in class and the teacher was nearby. Then I would do it, they would explode, the teacher would kick them out, and I would say, "Yeah." Because I wouldn't be the only person who didn't learn anything that day. But there was this one girl in class. Now, you all know this girl. Some of you were her, Miss Goody Two-Shoes. Everything perfect, pristine, on time, made everybody else look like a total jerk. I said, wouldn't it be great to get her kicked out of class? There was only one problem. She was cool, calm, collected. You couldn't get under her skin. But I was persistent. And I finally figured out what got her mad. And she was boiling. I mean, the steam was coming out of her ears. But I didn't push the last button till we were in class. And lo and behold, she sat right down in the seat in front of me. I said, "The Lord is good." And as the teacher approached, I started irritating her. I pushed the last button, but she didn't explode. She just quietly turned around and said, "You and me on the playground at recess." So that didn't work out all that well. But there are all these people who place value on people or take value away. And that's what we need to think about. The beginning of life. You have a female gamete, 23 chromosomes, no potential to become a human being. You have a male gamete, 23 chromosomes, no potential to become a human being. And then fertilization occurs. And at that instant, you have a zygote with 46 chromosomes, complete genetic code for a new and distinct human being. Not part of the mother, not part of the father, a completely different new individual who is rapidly developing. I mean, by the time 6 or 8 weeks have gone by, you've already got a heart that's beating. You can see little eye buds, little finger buds. All of these things are not random. They occur in an orderly fashion. And that brain is developing incredibly fast. Think about it. You know, billions and billions of neurons every single day. Hundreds of billions of interconnections. And by the time a baby is born, that brain is still rapidly developing. That's why newborn babies sleep 20 to 22 hours a day, because that brain is developing so fast. It continues to develop until your mid-20s. Some people it never develops, but think about that. We are in a society where people think that kids, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, with non-developed brains can make decisions that will change their lives forever without telling their parents. Bodily mutilation, hormonal injections. Think about that. It actually makes no sense at all, what we're doing. And then, what happens during an abortion? In the early stages, if you've ever seen one on the ultrasound, they always make sure that the woman is looking in a different direction or that she can't see the screen. Because you can see that baby, you can see the arms and the legs and the head, and all of a sudden you introduce this tube into this scene. And a lot of times, the baby moves away from it, but it can't escape. And it pulls off an arm, and it pulls off a leg, and you see all the blood and gore going down the tube. And later on, in the later stages, when the tissue is too tough to be taken out that way, they introduce a forceps into the uterus, grab whatever you can, twist and pull, and out comes an arm. Out comes a shoulder, a leg, a liver. It's abominable. And this is at a stage when we have proven medically that the babies have sensation. They can feel that. Imagine you can feel it and someone is tearing you apart, limb by limb, only because they think you're not important. You don't mean anything. And think about all those people who go about trying to save snail darters and little creatures. And I don't have any problem with saving the little creatures, but those little creatures are less sophisticated than that baby. So why not have the same concern about that baby? You know, you see these commercials on television about these animals that are being abused, and it touches me deeply. I love animals. But why can't we have the same concern about human babies who are in the womb, who are unprotected? This is what we really need to be thinking about as a society right now. You know, I remember being in South Africa. I was at a conference, and this was an achievement summit, and one of the speakers was the head of the ACLU. And he was talking about how the ACLU speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves, and how incredibly wonderful they are. And when he finished at Q&A time, I stood up and I said, I recently saw a young woman in my clinic. She was 33 weeks pregnant. She was on her way to Kansas to get an abortion. And that was the only place that they would do it that late. 33 weeks, that baby is viable outside of the womb without life support. And I said, fortunately, I was able to talk her out of getting the abortion. The baby had a neurological problem. We were able to fix it surgically, and she's so happy and she's thrilled with that baby. I said, would you speak for that baby? That baby had no one to speak for it. And he hemmed and he hawed and he dodged and he weaved, but he would never answer the question. So later on that evening at dinner, he was unfortunate enough to be seated next to me. And I continued the interrogation. And I said, you know, I operate sometimes on little premature babies, 26, 27, 28 weeks gestation. I said, would you speak for those babies? He said, absolutely. I said, but the one who was several weeks further developed and in the safest place they could possibly be in the mother's womb, you can't speak for that one? And he said, I know that doesn't make sense. He says, but I believe you can kill that baby until the moment it is born. And I said, would you say that in public? And he said, no. Now they will say it in public. That's how far we have descended as a society. And yet, the same people are willing to charge someone who murders a pregnant woman with 2 murders. So does that make any sense? If you murder the woman who is pregnant, you get charged with 2 murders. But if you murder the baby alone, no problem. These are the kinds of things that we need to be discussing with people. And for a long time, the left and those who are abortion advocates have had their voices heard without the opposing view. And we need to make sure that we get that opposing view out there and not be afraid. Fear keeps people from doing things. Even though they may believe in something, they don't want to be injured. I remember when I was running for president, one of the things that really encouraged me was the fact that from the smallest little hamlets to the biggest cities, the American people have common sense. What they don't have is courage. And a lot of people would rather stand in the corner and stare at the floor than to voice their opinion. We'd be willing to voice that opinion. And we have to be courageous. You know, when I was a resident, I remember I was on call one night, and in came a young man who had been severely beaten with a baseball bat. He was unconscious, his brain was swelling, he was about to die. So, of course, I called for the attending neurosurgeon because I was a resident. I couldn't operate on him by myself. Couldn't reach him. None of the other neurosurgeons were in town. They were at a national conference in Boston. And here was a situation where the young man was to die. A resident legally can't take someone to the operating room by himself to do a very dangerous operation. It would require moving portions of the brain to create space in the skull. I didn't know what to do, and I prayed for wisdom, and a calm came over me. And I realized immediately what I had to do. I had to take him to the operating room to do this operation that I had never done before, but that I had seen, risking my whole career. But you know, everything came back to me. It was crystal clear. The operation was successful. That young man today is a child psychologist doing just fine. But I didn't get in any trouble at all. And I bring that up to say that we do have a support system. It's called faith in God, believing in God. And we have a duty to do something with that faith. I want you to think back to World War II. Think about all those young women who went into the factories and were blown up in the munitions factories. Did that stop them? No. They kept going. They built more airplanes, tanks, and mortars than anybody could imagine. The young men, 16, 17, 18, many of them lied about their age so that they could fight for our country. Think about D-Day as they approached the shores of Normandy, being mowed down by machine gun fire. Hundreds of bodies dead in the sand. Thousands of bodies dead in the sand. Were the others afraid? Did they turn back? Yes, they were afraid. No, they didn't turn back. They stepped over the dead bodies. They overwhelmed the Axis forces, knowing in many cases they would never see their loved ones or their homeland again. Why did they do that? Obviously not for themselves. They did it for you and me so that we could live in peace and freedom, the rights that we have. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's our turn to do it for those who are coming after us. Thank you very much.